In a previous video, we've looked at how political parties played a part in the presidential elections, and now we're going to look at how the presidential election actually works, and we have to look at something called the Electoral College, which is in the news every 4 years when we talk about presidential elections, but then most of us forget about it between then. But you do need to know this for our class, and it's important to know how the president is elected, so we're going to look at that today. You often hear the race to 270, and we'll explain why that number is important when it comes to presidential elections. The Electoral College, so this is a group of people that actually meets in mid-December after the election has occurred in early November, and these are representatives from each state and the District of Columbia, meaning Washington, D.C. That's what D.C. stands for. And they're the ones who formally select the president and the vice president. The framers originally intended electors to kind of use their own judgment, but today the electors are mostly expected to follow along with how their state has voted in the presidential election. So it's important to remember, you as a voter do not go and directly vote for president. You're actually voting for electors to go from your state and represent your state in the Electoral College when the president is selected. Nowadays, though, the party that wins that presidential election, that candidate, they get to choose those electors, so they know how those people will vote in the Electoral College vote. Each state gets a number of electors equal to the number of House representatives and senators that it has in Congress. Right now, at least in 2018, as of the making of this video, Ohio has 18 electors, because we have 16 House members and 2 senators. That can change after 2020 if after the census Ohio maybe has fewer or more House members, then they would get fewer or more members in the Electoral College. So bigger states have more power in the Electoral College because they have more people. A candidate has to win 270 electors to win the White House. That is because if you take 435, which is the number of people in the House, plus 100, which puts you to 535, and then there are electors for the District of Columbia, which gets you to 538 electors, which half of that, rounded up 1, is 270, so that's how you get 270 votes gets you the win in the Electoral College, because you've won more than 50% at that point. Everything after that is just gravy. You've won it with 270. However, there are some problems with this weird two-step system that we have for electing the president. The big problem or criticism is that the winner of the popular vote is not necessarily guaranteed to win the presidency. You may ask, how can that happen? Well, if you win enough states by a very small margin that you can win the Electoral College, it doesn't matter if you lose by huge amounts in other states. So you could lose tremendously in California or Texas or New York and really be way behind in the popular vote overall in the United States, but you've won enough other states to get to 270. So then you run into a problem where the majority of voters in the country didn't actually choose the person who becomes president. It has happened 5 times in the history of our country, so it's not unprecedented. It happened most recently in 2016. It also happened in the year 2000 when George Bush beat Al Gore, even though they lost the popular vote. So this does happen, and critics of the Electoral College would say the system needs to change to reflect the popular vote. We'll talk about some counter arguments to that, though, here in a little bit. Another potential problem with the Electoral College is that electors are not actually required to vote in accord with the popular vote. So again, the popular vote doesn't always line up with how the Electoral College goes. Another problem with the Electoral College, if neither person wins a majority in the Electoral College, then the House of Representatives gets to decide who is president, and each state just gets 1 vote. So you have states with very small number of population will have equal power in an election with a state with a lot of population, so you're having issues with our voters being represented. This doesn't happen very often, but the fact that it is possible presents a bit of a problem. Another problem with the Electoral College is that voters in many states view their votes as being worthless or useless. If you are a Democrat who lives in Texas, let's say, Texas has pretty consistently voted Republican the last few elections. your vote doesn't really count in the presidential election because Texas is going to go to the Republican candidate. They're going to get all the Electoral College votes from that state, so it does not matter really how you vote. Same thing if you are a Republican voter in California, which has consistently gone Democratic. If you know California is going to go Democratic, you may feel less like voting. And so that's a problem because it's maybe reducing the number of people who might vote in a presidential election on both sides. You can see here it doesn't always represent the popular vote. In 2008, President Obama got a 53% victory in the popular vote, which is a pretty big margin for modern presidential elections. But in the Electoral College, it looks like he won by a landslide because he won 68% of the votes. So it doesn't really line up with the vote. So as you can see here, what I was saying about the 2016 election, you can see where the popular vote here, where Hillary Clinton had about 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, but Donald Trump had a clear majority in the Electoral College. So it just doesn't always line up with the popular vote. However, there are arguments for the Electoral College. This political cartoon's pointing out that if you didn't have to worry about the smaller states and their Electoral College votes, many people wouldn't campaign at all in Iowa or North Dakota or South Dakota. You would just try to run up a ton of votes in Texas, Florida, New York, California, Ohio, Illinois, and get those large votes, large numbers of people, so that candidate may actually just ignore large parts of the country without the Electoral College. It is an interesting debate and definitely something you may want to look into more as you get closer to being of voting age to see how you feel about this issue. But just understand what the Electoral College is and how it actually chooses who becomes president. It is different than a straight popular vote. If you have any questions about this, of course, reach out to your government teacher, and thanks for watching.